We're trying to strengthen the way we view the world and take in as much information as we can and see that information for what it truly is, not what we want it to be.
Well, here we are on the Sunday special with Joe Rogan. We're going to jump into the interview in just a moment because this is awesome. But first, I want to say thanks to our sponsors over at Movement. So, Movement, they make these kinds of watches, right? It's nice. Go buy one. Movement has come far from being crowdfunded kids working out of a living room. In the past year, they've not only introduced a bunch of new watch collections for both men and women, but they've also expanded to sunglasses and bracelets for her. Movement watches start at just $95 at a department store. These are like $400 or $500. Movement figured out by selling online, they could actually cut out the middleman, retail markup, providing the best possible price, classic design, quality construction, style minimalism. Get 15% off today with free shipping and free returns. Just go to mvmt.com/Shapiro. See why the movement keeps growing. Check out their expanding collection. Again, it's mvmt.com/Shapiro. Join the movement. And again, look at this. Nice, right? I mean, like you could use one as well. Okay, so here we are on the Sunday special with Joe Rogan, the granddaddy of us all in the podcast space. I mean, this dude made the podcast space, and he's awesome also. So thanks so much for stopping by.
I don't think I did that. I think Adam Carolla did it.
Well, I'll have to have you guys fight it out.
I came in after.
I love Adam too, so I'll have to. But there's no question that right now you're dominant in the space, and it's an amazing thing because you're a really gifted guy. I mean, you can sit there for 3 hours with somebody and talk about the most random topic and make it really interesting. So I need the backstory. So all of my listeners and people who are fans of mine might not know your work as well, might not know kind of your story. So how did you get to be doing what you're doing right now? Like, give us the whole history.
Well, with the podcasting, it just started out doing a video thing with just Ustream. We're just doing Q&A. Like people would tweet questions, we'd answer questions just for fun. I did it once. And I actually did it a couple of times backstage in between shows years before that. There was a thing called Justin TV, which I'm not sure what that is now. It became a new company. But we would just show backstage. We'd have like a webcam going and would just play around and talk to people and have fun. And then we did the one Q&A, and I said, all right, I'm going to do it again next week. We'll try to do it regularly. So I did it again the next Monday, and then it became a weekly thing. Then we started uploading it to iTunes, and then we started getting guests, and then I said, okay, I got to get out of my house. All these weirdos were coming over my house. I'm like, I'll just get a studio somewhere. So I got a studio, and then after the studio, I'm like, well, the studio's kind of little. Let's get a bigger studio. So then I got a bigger studio, and then now it's somehow or another it's a business.
And you've got a monster studio you were telling me about now that's just awesome. It sounds
yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's indoor archery range and a full gym, and it's pretty nuts.
I've totally gone wrong with this studio. There's no question about it. So what got you all the way to the podcasting? I mean, like start from the beginning, from childhood, from birth. Like what's your whole backstory?
Well, from high school on till I was 21, I was competing in martial arts tournaments. That was my background. I was a Taekwondo instructor. I taught at Boston University. I competed in all these different national tournaments. I traveled all around the country. Most of my formative years were spent traveling around the country fighting in martial arts tournaments. That was basically all I did with my entire day. Like I was obsessed from the time I was 15 until I was 21. When I was 21, I started doing stand-up comedy. And I went from...
Pretty big shift?
Yeah, well, you know, I was realizing that fighting was really bad for your brain. And I was realizing that from... I was getting a lot of headaches, and there was a lot of sparring. Like, I was getting into kickboxing. I had 3 kickboxing fights, and I was realizing that this was going to definitely have a negative effect on my consciousness. There was no way around it. And the quality of my thoughts and the way I think about things was always... It's one of the most important things to guide you through life. And I'm like, I am putting my future brain in jeopardy. And I was seeing it around me from a bunch of other people that were in the gym that were professional fighters and that were getting brain damage. I was essentially seeing them starting to slur their words, and I was seeing this effect. And I knew I had to get out somehow or another. And luckily, one of my friend Steve Graham, I'm good friends with to this day, talked me into doing stand-up comedy, talked me into going up at an open mic night when I was 21.
It's amazing. And you've been doing that ever since. I mean, you're still doing shows today, right?
Yeah.
So you've got the special that's on Netflix, which is awesome.
Yeah, I have one special that's on Netflix. Well, 2 of them that are on Netflix now, but then a new one that I just filmed that'll be on Netflix in September.
Which is really exciting. So I want to ask you actually a little bit about the MMA stuff, because you still cover MMA. You're still big into MMA. Obviously, you're the big analyst over there. Do you think that there is I've been worrying about this about the NFL, and I wonder if it also applies to MMA. Do you think that there is always going to be MMA, there's always going to be NFL, boxing? Do you think these things are always going to exist, or do you think that as a society we're going to transition away from those as people start to become more concerned about brain injury, for example? Like you've seen the NFL's ratings decline because people seem to be really worried about concussion levels.
Yeah. I think in the recent future we're going to have these things, but I think in the distant future we're probably not going to. I think we're going to move away from them because of the damage that they do, because we're going to understand, unless there's some radical new medical technology that can regenerate brain tissue to the point where you don't have to worry about brain injuries, which is not outside the realm of possibility. You know, I mean, medical science, what they're doing with stem cells and exosomes and all the different therapies that they're using on people today, who knows? I mean, who knows what they're going to be able to do 50 years from now. But I think it's entirely likely that until then, until some radical new technology comes on, I think there's probably going to be less and less people that are interested in having their kids sign up to play football. You're seeing that now. Definitely have less and less people interested in fighting since traumatic brain injuries have been revealed to be, you know, really prevalent in kids that are involved in like football, even at like Pop Warner and high school levels, and fighting. I mean, just from the time a kid can hit hard, you know, like you're in, you know, like one of the good things about martial arts, teaching kids young, is when you teach them young, they can't really hurt each other yet. So even when they're hitting each other, it's all very light, and they're learning technique and movement before there's real consequences. And then as they get older, though, you know, if you're sparring when you're a teenager and you're sparring when you're, you know, in your early 20s, you're absolutely giving yourself brain damage. It's just part of the package. That you have to just be able to figure out, okay, when have I suffered enough? When am I getting out? And that is the big question for a lot of fighters. When do I jump off this ride? Because it's so exciting, and what they're doing is such a incredibly thrilling and glory-filled event. You know, when you're competing against another person, they lock you in a cage. And the way I describe fighting, I mean, a lot of people like to think of it as a barbaric thing. I call it high-level problem solving with dire physical consequences. And that's really the best way to describe it, because you're trying to do something to someone who's trying to do something to you. And genetics and knowledge and technique and discipline and drive and focus, these are all factors that are mixed up in this thing, and you're trying to figure out who's going to come out on top.
I mean, I wonder if maybe that's the reason that MMA is going to keep growing as the NFL declines, is honesty and marketing. Yeah. When you watch MMA, you're watching people get the crap kicked out of them. Right. You're watching people bleed and your bones get broken. The NFL's been promising for years that basically everyone's fine, that it's all just watching people hit pillows. And then you see them later and they can't walk and they're falling apart. MMA, I do wonder if there is a certain element of channeling just the human drive, particularly the male drive, for aggression in watching these kinds of sports. Because I know a lot of genteel dudes who love MMA specifically because there's part of just the human psyche that needs to watch people get their ass kicked.
Yeah, it's genetic. It's definitely in our core. I mean, it's what led people to overcome being invaded by you know, foreign villages that snuck in the middle of the night. You had to be able to fight with your hand. How people fought over mates, how people fought over territory and property. It's just a part of the human experience. And to have it boiled down into a martial art, then it's like you get all the satisfaction of watching combat, but at the end of it, people are friendly, they hug, you know, they shake hands, they raise each other's arms up, the audience cheers and claps, and it's very thrilling. And, you know, and some could say it's actually cathartic, that it actually releases this desire for aggression and violence.
I think there's a good case to be made for that, especially because you do see that in the animal kingdom. You see chimpanzees sparring with each other basically just for a show of dominance. And you certainly see it among young boys. I can see it with my 2-year-old now.
Sure.
Who like constantly just wants to fight. Like the 4-year-old girl, she wants to sit there and be nice and play with her toys and read. And my 2-year-old boy wants to kick some ass. I mean, he is hardcore. And which gets us to, you know, one of the topics that you and I have talked about before, which is sort of these gender differences between male and female. As you've been watching it's been probably a year and a half since we last talked. What do you think of sort of the movement that's continued apace to get rid of these gender differences that you've been seeing in society more broadly?
It's very strange because it's science denialism. And the left is all about science until it comes to gender. And once it comes to gender, they don't want to hear about studies. They don't want to hear about genetic differences between males and females. They don't want to hear about preferences or any studies that show that people with higher testosterone tend to go towards certain activities. People with lower ones tend to go. They don't want to hear about that. They want this weird thing where you're not even having the Boy Scouts anymore. You just have the Scouts. Like there's this bizarre desire to eliminate gender as even a variable. It's very weird, and I don't know why. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what's causing it. I suspect it's people that don't enjoy certain aspects of male versus female competition or male versus male competition, and the way that they feel like they can sort of diminish that is to try to make the whole subject seem like as if it's fruitless and there's nothing there. Let's leave it on. There is no difference. It's a weird time when it comes to discussing gender. Like gender, all of a sudden, which was something that was just, oh, there's a boy, there's a girl. I mean, our whole life, within the last half a decade, it's become this hugely politically charged subject where like I saw, my wife was reading this thing that she had to fill out today, and she goes, look at this. She goes, it says, what do I identify with, male or female? It's like, state your sex. It used to be state your sex. Now it's, what do you identify with? And I'm like, okay, what percentage of the people are we placating with this?
Yep.
Like who are...
And it's so bizarre. It actually has medical consequences. So I know a lot of doctors because I've said many times my wife is a doctor. And there are cases now where doctors are walking into a room and it says on the chart that somebody is of a particular sex and they're not of that sex because they're writing the sex they perceive themselves to be. Well, that changes your diagnosis. You have a completely different body. So I heard a story about one patient who came in and was having lower abdominal pain. Well, if you're a boy versus you're a girl, that's going to make a pretty large difference into how that diagnosis goes. Like, shouldn't at least a doctor know what sex you're born with? It's totally wild, and it's all this attempt to level, I think, everything. The attempt to just get rid of natural differences between human beings and pretend they don't exist. Like we all want everybody to obviously have equal rights and equal liberties, but that's not the same thing as saying that everybody is going to be equally strong in a fighting ring.
What do you think is causing all this?
I mean, I think what's causing all of this is that there's a deep desire right now in a free society to try and figure out why some people succeed and some people fail, and we're never allowed to say that there are natural issues at stake. And I understand the resistance to it based on race, right? So, for example, you see a lot of people who will say you can't ever talk about racial differences in IQ because that is going to lead toward this racist conclusion that your race defines your IQ, which is a silly conclusion. Like there are racial differences in IQ based on kind of group statistics, but that has no relevance to the particular individual standing in front of you. And so you saying this black guy is stupid because he's black is racist. You saying there are group differences in IQ because every study ever done has shown group differences in IQ, not even based on racial groups necessarily, but based on different groups generally between age groups. There are differences in IQ actually. If you show that, at least from young age to like 12, if you mention any of these things, then you're overriding the idea of a tabula rasa human being who can be created in whatever image you want. Like what people really want is to correct the cosmic imbalances, as Thomas Sowell says. I don't know. What do you think is behind it?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and I think there's a tremendous amount of white guilt involved in it as well. I mean, because basically what the IQ tests are showing when they do study differences in IQ and races, you're showing the rise of the superiority of the Asian race. I mean, Asians dominate those things, and everybody just sort of just like, well, that's let's not talk about that. Let's talk about white and black because that's more convenient and it's easier, and they could find a victim and they could find a perpetrator. And what you're also seeing, like, there's a lot of Asian groups that are furious because they're getting discriminated against about getting into colleges and universities. They have higher standards because they have such a high percentage of Asians that are getting into the universities. And it's very strange because they're not vocal about it, and they're not publicizing it, and they're not screaming racism in the streets, but they're the victims of it. They actually are the victims of hard work and success and excellent genetics.
Right. Well, there's no question. And the differences in culture are really the place where we should be putting most of our focus, because when it comes to natural imbalances, there's only so much that you can do, right? I'm not going to be fighting you in a ring anytime soon because I'd just get destroyed. But but when it comes to cultural differences, that's the stuff that we can correct for. And instead of doing that, what we tend to do is we tend to pretend that the cultural differences are not brought about by immediate decision making by parents. or by immediate communities. It's something out there, right? It's racism in the ether, or it's discrimination writ large. It's something out there. We can't put our heads around it exactly, but it's something that's making us imbalanced. And so the way to fix that is by getting rid of all imbalances that we see. And so if there's an imbalance between men and women, we'll just pretend that doesn't exist anymore, and that it must have been caused by something that we can't quite control.
Yeah, it's definitely not an objective way of approaching the issue. I think there's a host of different factors that play into every community, right? There's the echoes of the poor behavior of the people that lived there before you, all the consequences of other people's actions that have affected all the people around you, people going to jail, people that have experienced racism, people that have experienced poor treatment by law enforcement, massive distrust around you, very difficult to excel in those environments. You're constantly like running away from gangs and headed home. I don't think we should hold those people up to the same standards as we should people that grow up in very safe middle-class communities where they don't have to worry about all this stuff. I think there's a bunch of different factors, and everybody's looking for one.
Exactly.
And the one factor that appeals to their ideology.
Yeah.
I think that's a real problem.
And it's a problem also. Anytime you mention IQ, everybody goes nuts because immediately they suggest that what you're saying is racist. And the truth is that whatever IQ differentials there are, it's unclear how much is explained by genetics and how much is explained by environment. But some is clearly explained by genetics and some is clearly explained by environment. As soon as you say that, everybody suggests that you are operating in a racist space. So it's as you say, when it comes to data, like this happened with Sam Harris when he was being interviewed by Ezra Klein, right? Ezra Klein just went after him for suggesting that science is science. Well, science is still science, even if you don't like the science. And it seems like the same thing should apply when it comes to biological differences. In a second, I want to ask you about the comedy world, because that's obviously the other area in which you exist.